Welcome to ScaleUp Radio Shorts, the bite-sized insight for business leaders. This show is brought to you by Smart 90, the proven 90-day execution system for scaling businesses. I'm Kevin Brent, and I'm here with my co-founder, Granger Forson.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. Now, Kevin, we've had some truly fascinating conversations on the main ScaleUp Radio podcast recently, and today we wanted to pull out two in particular and really contrast the lessons learned from them.
That's right. We're talking about our interviews with Dan Boardman-Weston, CEO of BI Wealth Management, and Paul Miller, the founder of Cornish Accounting Solutions. Two leaders in professional services, but with remarkably different journeys and philosophies of two.
Exactly. And I think the first point of contrast is their backgrounds. It really sets the stage for everything else. You start with Dan, who joined his family's business, BRI, straight out of school at 18.
Right. He mentioned it was initially just to earn some pocket money for a gap year, but he ended up staying, and by his late 20s, he was CEO. A huge part of his story was this immense drive to prove he was there on his own merit, not just because of his surname.
On his own merit, yes. And then you have Paul Miller on the complete other end of the spectrum. He described himself as having drifted into accountancy. He didn't excel at maths, didn't find the exams easy, and only started his own firm in 1994 after finding other city jobs were taken.
It's such a different starting point, isn't it? One is driven from day one to prove himself in a pre-existing structure, and the other finds his calling almost by accident and builds from the ground up.
And that flows directly into their personalities and leadership styles. Dan is all energy and ambition. He described himself as a bit of a rent-a-gob, always having an opinion and using media appearances to build credibility.
I remember that. And he talked about his company's no dickhead policy, which is a memorable way to describe a culture of respect. Despite his drive, he said he wasn't authoritarian. He wants to give people flexibility.
Right, a focus on growth and strategy. Paul, on the other hand, is defined by his compassion and focus on soft skills. He sees himself as a storyteller and a consigliere, like a trusted advisor from The Godfather.
Yes, and his story about contracting meningococcal septicemia in 2000 was incredibly powerful. He was working 80 hours a week, and the illness forced him to completely re-evaluate his life. He cut his client base by 25%, and his profits actually went up.
A perfect real-world example of the 80-20 principle. It just shows how their life experiences directly shaped their approach to business. And that leads to how they each define success.
Absolutely. For Dan, success is about being the best, not the biggest. While he has a clear financial metric, scaling client assets from 700 million to potentially 2 billion pounds, it's all in service of providing the highest quality of service in his regions.
Best, not biggest. Whereas Paul's definition is all about legacy. He wants to be known for doing the right things and for leaving the business in a better state for his son and grandchildren. It's much more focused on family succession and reputation.
Which makes perfect sense given he runs a family business with his wife, son, and daughter. It's fascinating how those definitions then influence their strategy and execution.
It really does. What stood out from our conversation with Dan was his initial focus. When he took over as CEO, he spent 3 years working in the business, fixing the internal structures, people, processes, propositions. He made sure the foundations were solid before he started pushing for aggressive growth.
Right. He knew he couldn't deliver excellent service at scale if the back end wasn't right. Paul, coming from a different angle, stresses the absolute need to work on the business rather than in it. And he's a huge advocate for 90-day planning, taking that strategic time out that most owners feel they're too busy for.
Which, of course, is music to our ears at Smart 90. Let's touch on their philosophies around people and teams, because again, there are some great parallels and differences here.
For Dan, the key lesson was getting the right people in the right seats. He champions extensive training, but also recognizes that you can't force technical experts into management roles if it's not their aptitude. Let them excel at what they're good at.
That's such an important point. Paul complements this perfectly by highlighting that the visionary founder who is great at building the business often isn't the right person to manage it day to day. He says you need to find an integrator, someone who loves systems and processes, to keep the business running smoothly.
The visionary and the integrator, a classic partnership for scale. This selective approach also extends to how they view clients and acquisitions.
Yeah, with Dan focused on growth through acquisition, his biggest lesson was that most acquisitions fail due to poor post-acquisition integration. It's not about the deal, it's about what happens after. His focus is on matching the acquired clients with the right advisor to ensure that 98% retention rate they've achieved.
That integration piece is critical, and Paul's approach to client acquisition is the ultimate example of selectivity. He told us he only takes on about 10% of the leads that come his way.
Only 10%. He's not afraid to say no, or to let go of existing clients who aren't a good fit anymore. He called it helping them find happiness elsewhere. It's about protecting his team's capacity and ensuring they only work with clients who align with their values.
Which brings us to their final pieces of advice. They really neatly summarize their entire outlooks. My takeaway from Dan was his final powerful statement: be bolder, swing the bat, and do not be afraid of failure.
Classic Dan. All about that forward momentum and entrepreneurial spirit. Paul's advice was the perfect counterpoint. He said business survival is increasingly about soft skills, communication, negotiation, listening, and he recommended the book Never Split the Difference.
Two brilliant yet completely different closing thoughts. One about bold action, the other about nuanced communication. It just goes to show there's no single path to building a successful business.
That's the key takeaway for me. Whether you're driven like Dan to prove yourself and scale aggressively, or you take a more measured, legacy-focused path like Paul, the underlying principles of getting the right people, the right systems, and the right clients are universal.
Well said, Granger. And if this discussion has piqued your interest, we highly recommend you listen to the full, in-depth interviews. Just search for ScaleUp Radio wherever you get your podcasts to find our conversations with Dan Boardman-Weston and Paul Miller.
Please do follow the podcast so you don't miss future episodes. And to find out more about the 90-day execution system we've mentioned, visit smart90.co.uk. Thanks for tuning in to ScaleUp Radio Shorts.